let's really get to the bottom of all of this. And I'm going to start off with asking each of the panelists to take what Michael has just said as a general basis for why you think there cannot be an alignment at the moment between government policies and something like fiscal policy or any other type of policy that we seem to be attempting to do. I'm going to give you all literally 1 minute, please. Starting with Peter over here, and I saw your column this morning, which is why I thought fiscal would be quite apt to start with you. But please have a think. 1 minute, give us something to think about, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks very much, Gina. Well, it just seemed to me, I mean, Michael ended his talk on the need for some sort of compact with business. And it strikes me that, all of the problems that we have are the result of sort of ideology or mistrust, and the solution to almost everything he said begins, in my mind, with an attempt to create a more trusting political economy. And business can contribute to that, and I think they don't try hard enough. There was a very important book written in the UK a couple of years ago, well, many decades ago now, called The State We're In, and it was written by a guy called Will Hutton, and he was basically saying we need to think and act in the longer term. Everything we do is short term. In this country, more listed companies in South Africa per head of population are run by accountants than in anywhere in the world. In Germany, they're run by engineers. In America, by entrepreneurs. And what happens in this country is an incredibly destructive kind of capitalism, and it has to be brought under some kind of control. Larry Fink at BlackRock writes about it all the time. We need to find a way to stop people chasing short-term profits at the expense of jobs and security. And there are ways to do that, simply through the tax system. We should encourage people to hold on to shares that they buy for a long time and punish them for speculating. We should encourage share ownership schemes or share incentive schemes that are 10 years long by not taxing the proceeds and punishing the guys who are turning around 3-year schemes every 6 months because there's a bit of corporate action. We need a new capitalism, and in doing that, we begin then to create this sense of, both sides are losing something, both sides are giving up something, and we begin, I don't know, just to see business making a real physical contribution and to do something that's actually hard and not costing anybody any money. It will grow more than it destroys. But we need to see a more stakeholder-driven capitalism than the old Victorian thing that we settled with at the moment.
I think Peter has used my minute, right? So I agree with everything he said. So
those are your ideas.
Yeah. No, what I got from Michael is what Michael said, and I think building on what Peter said is that accountability has been the big problem, I think, in this country. Certainly in the private sector, but definitely in the public sector too. We talk of the spending, you say, in the Department of Health. I think performance has dipped dramatically all over the place, not just in the public sector. I spoke to Chris Griffith, who resigned this week as Amplatz, and he talked about the productivity crisis in the private sector. So I feel to me one of the bigger problems that we need to address is accountability in the wider sense. And I think Michael's idea of linking performance to the performance of those jobs so that the money that is spent, we get better value for it. It's not just the betterment of certain individuals' pockets, but for the betterment of our society. I think that's a fundamental way we need to rethink of restructuring it. And that, I think, is probably under a minute.
There we go. Thank you. Nompumelelo?
Yes, I think what I took from the presentation is that lost a bit about the burden on the black poor. I think one of the questions we need to continue to grapple with as a young democracy is how do we legitimate the state, and how do we avert a crisis of legitimation? And when you look at the strides that we've made, right, we've got a great constitution that holds out the promise of justice, equality, freedom, etc. But like scholars like Amartya Sen have shown, is that you cannot separate or divorce freedom from development. These two things have to go together. And so political rights and civil liberties alone can't sustain democracy. And so we need to speak about that grouping in our society that continues to be excluded. It's not just the socioeconomic exclusion, but the socioeconomic exclusion has political implications as well. And if you look at just the point that has been made about compacting in society, our institutionalized processes of compacting usually represent elite groupings, right? It's government, it's labor, and business. And those excluded, the black poor, the unemployed, the undereducated, those that experience challenges with accessing opportunities, they don't have a seat at the table. And this group is not politically apathetic, not in the least, but they are augmenting their participation in formal politics and democratic processes with insurgent citizenship, like protests, social protests, like social movement activity. And that is beginning to be a site of contestation in our politics, right? That's playing itself out. And I think that's something we need to look at, because this presentation shows that fiscal austerity will have a huge impact on that grouping. And so that will have implications for our stability, particularly at the local state level.
Very good. Wayne?
Yeah, we see a crisis of legitimacy in government. Government has this feeling that if it just legislates or puts in place regulations, that things will just happen. Administration falls into place. And unfortunately, it doesn't. You have to have robust administrative systems, and you have to have good management of your administration. So that's why an ETOL scheme will fail. Not the policy, not the technology. It works around the world, but when you cannot administer or enforce your own laws, OUTA is going to be the next problem. It's just they forced it in. They haven't conducted their public engagement process properly. And so we'll have another failed, massive system where people then start driving without vehicle licenses and so on. So this legitimacy of the state is becoming questioned all the time through its inability to administer its own laws. I come back to also the issue of accountability. We do not see accountability. We see politicians right down to a local government level being fired, being suspended for maladministration, for corruption, popping up in all sorts of places in other parts of the country. Very little has been done around that space. We have Shamila Batoina in office over a year, and it's frustrating because the evidence that is there, and I'm talking about 1/10 of the evidence that is there in any normal country, those people would have been put in jail. I'm talking about people that are very wealthy walking the streets right now that have robbed you and I, should not be where they are today, should have been prosecuted by now, and the people are getting angry about this. All of the corruption and the maladministration is impacting on the poorest of the poor. Why is it that we should have to, as civil society, go and exercise our rights for access to information from a public protector? How does the little guy fight this? How does the little person go and get information which should be accessible to the public? And so we have to fight for our rights, and that compact is missing. And that's why you see the rise of civil society and civil activism. Sadly, it's a destructive energy which we need to harness and get away from destruction and introduce now more citizen-based, citizen activism in fixing the country. You see it right now in Harrismith. The people take over the running of the town. The problem is that the municipal managers never still get their salaries. And that's going to give rise to a tax revolt in local government. We have local elections coming next year. There's going to be an interesting dynamic playing out. But sadly, the politicians have interfered and ruined it.
Great, thank you. Simon?
Yeah, I think just on the question of reconciling fiscal policy and national policy, I mean, I really enjoyed the point that Michael made about the Polokwane moment, which I entirely agree with, where the ANC and the alliance was placed in a much more powerful position in dictating and determining national a government policy. I would add to that, because I can't disagree with it at all, and to say that there was an additional Nazareth moment where ANC policy has become more actively used as a tool of factional warfare within the party, which adds more emphasis to this party-to-state policy dynamic that we've seen accumulating over the last couple of years. And certainly now you see a far more complex set of political demands coming out of the ANC, weighing on national government and, of course, on national treasury. And then compounding that, you're coming after a period of protracted low growth. The ANC has lost support. It regained some of it in the last national elections, but is clearly on a trajectory. The FF at 10%, etc. It leads politicians, which is not unique to South Africa, to start making promises that it may not even be able to deliver on, or may know that it can't deliver on, in reaction to weak political dynamics and weak growth. And the Polokwane moment, of course, was preceded. In 2004, the ANC got the highest national vote share that it'll probably ever get, at 69%. They had the political power to rein in the party's ability to influence national government and the propensity and the strength of institutions and so on. I would just add one point and say that, another aspect of Michael's talk that really resonated was, I think business can play a role in not making unrealistic demands on government when it comes to things like cutting jobs and reining in spending. And you know the story when you speak to asset managers and so on. There's a way of interpreting what needs to happen in the budget, which often negates the real social implications of those kinds of policies. And there's a denial of the reality that government faces in trying to adopt an approach that the market is demanding. And I think it's very important that we, in the private sector, acknowledge those very deep socioeconomic realities when we make demands, so that our demands are not ethically unreasonable. And then there's a closer connection between what the market is expecting, what government's able to deliver, and that might start to build confidence.
Perfect. Well, I'm gonna stick to that, and I want to get to the audience. I want to get you all involved now too. And what I'm picking up here is that we're all agreeing that there is an elite. The elite itself cannot necessarily help to align the broader policies, or don't even know what the broader policies are in government, to align them to important policies like fiscal, like monetary, etc. So I want to talk about this unspoken or rising civil society. And Simon, I just want to start with you and ask you, last year's national election, we saw one of the biggest voter turnouts that South Africa had, and it's not normal. For the record, typically it's normal to reduce your votes turnout as a democracy, but the almost 10 percentage point drop simply tells us that there are more people out there who can't find a political party to address a very basic need that they have in their life. What could that lead to? We've got local elections next year. This year we've got the ANC's National General Council. What is happening on the ground in South Africa that could, and I'm not asking you to predict the future of what happens to the parties of South Africa, but clearly there is not political leadership at the moment. And these data points are telling us that. How do you see this pan out?
Yeah, that was one of the biggest takeaways last year, is that we're one of the few countries in the world that measures voter turnout as a percentage of registered voters, whereas everywhere else in the world they say how many votes cast as a percentage of eligible voters. And if you do that in South Africa, last year was 48%, which if you map us on with comparative democracies in the emerging world, Brazil and elsewhere, and of course with more advanced democracies, we're incredibly low, 20 percentage points off where our peers are. So it was a dramatic outcome. Why is that happening? I think you touched on it. The parties that are pitching for votes are not resonating with big chunks of the electorate. Many of them are younger than 35, but not exclusively. I think these local government failures and some of the loss of trust in government has led people, not necessarily, as is happening elsewhere in the world, to take on radical alternatives to the mainstream, to actually largely shun those radical alternatives and to object through not voting. How will that play out? The obvious thing is that another set of parties start to appeal to that community that is currently out of the system. Or we just carry on in the current slow grind down in terms of delivery and growth, with an increasing body of people feeling disconnected and disenfranchised. It doesn't mean necessarily, and this is a conclusion that people often draw, that all of these data points will lead inevitably to some kind of massive social upheaval like in Arab Spring. because South Africa has a wide range of mitigating factors in that. We're not as densely populated in urban areas. Because of apartheid spatial geography, the people that have the greatest reason to be upset are seldom connected to each other. They lack that organizational, the ability to organize and to protest. That's why Feesman's Fall was different, because the site of protest was at the center of economic activity. So there are various reasons why we may not necessarily follow that trajectory if we continue to be as disconnected from formal politics. But it's likely that you'll just see a continued rise or a sustained level of local protests. And the service delivery protests over the last 10 years corroborate that. And we'll probably see a continuation of that with the arrival of some new political alternatives between now and 2014. Although the current ones that are positioning themselves, I can't see as really attracting that disenfranchised base.